What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical, average American here today to react and learn about the EU's response to the Trump tariffs. So, as you may have heard about, President Trump has recently placed tariffs on many countries around the world, and notably a 20% tariff on the EU specifically. However, all of this stuff is really changing a lot day to day, and as of right now, those tariffs, including the 20% tariff on the EU, has been placed on a pause for 90 days. But it's still set to go into effect sometime in July, I guess? Unless, I suppose, something else changes, which is entirely possible at this point. I don't think anybody, not even us Americans, understand what is going to happen, or really at this point, the goal of all of this, even for Americans in the United States. It's our government who's doing all this. Even we're not sure what the goal or the end purpose of all this is, because that has been really there's been a lot of different explanations coming out of our government, and a lot of different reasoning for what's happening and the decisions being made. So yeah, we had the Liberation Day with all the global tariffs, and Trump basically said, this is definitely happening. This is going to be great for the United States. We're sick of being taken advantage of. And then, just a few days later, we're pausing it and going into all these negotiations, and all of this might not even happen, or maybe some of it will happen. Now there's a 10% flat tariff. It's really enough to drive you kind of insane. But today, I really want to try to check out this video by TLDR News EU, which have come out with this great video called "Should the EU Use Its Trade Bazooka Against Trump?" My hands are up. Please don't launch the bazooka at me, please. I don't know what that means. I don't know what a trade bazooka is. But basically, this video is going to explain how Europe is responding to all of this. Because here in the United States, we certainly get the American perspective on all of this stuff, and we get our news here, but we really don't get the outside perspective, the European perspective. So I really want to hear about this. So let's take a look.
When Trump tariffed all of America's trading partners on Liberation Day, he said it was about reciprocity.
Right.
In other words, he was only imposing tariffs as big as the ones that other tariffs had already imposed on the US. Now, this was always implausible. After all, the 20% tariff he slapped on the EU was way above the 2% average tariff the EU has on US imports.
Yeah, so this is a whole other thing. Nothing about this makes any sense. These are not the actual dollar for dollar values or percentages that actually reflect the tariffs that other countries charge to the USA. These numbers are essentially just made up, from what I understand, or they have some kind of cockamamie formula or something, but basically these percentages were incredibly inflated so that the United States could say, oh, we're just charging half of what you're doing to us. But it says here that the EU has 39% tariffs on America. And when economists and people who know what they're talking about analyze this, they're like, at best it's more like 2%. So you really can't overstate how ridiculous this chart ended up being.
Was way above the 2% average tariff the EU has on US imports. And it looks like the rates were actually calculated using bilateral trade data, not other countries' tariff rates.
Yeah, here we go. So the numbers weren't completely made up out of thin air. There's some kind of cockamamie formula or something. People figured this out. And basically, from what I understand, none of it is based in reality or makes any kind of logical sense. Certainly shouldn't be driving your policy decision making, that's for sure.
Nonetheless, this is why on Monday the EU offered to drop all tariffs on cars and industrial goods, hoping that, in the spirit of reciprocity, Trump might do the same. Unfortunately, Trump wasn't convinced, and
I didn't even know about that. The EU offered to make a concession? I know after the tariffs were announced, a lot of countries around the world basically had to decide if you wanted to try to do a deal with Trump, which I imagine can be extremely frustrating, or if you just want to say, forget it, I'm not doing business with the United States, which I'm positive at this point is extremely tempting for many countries around the world. But from the sound of this, I didn't realize the EU is trying to make some kind of deal, at least tried, and Trump turned it down. This is, I mean, it's very difficult, isn't it? Because I know Trump supposedly has some kind of strategy for making deals, going way over the top, and then trying to get a really great deal when the person making on the other side of the deal has to, start negotiating from this ridiculous starting point. In this case, him saying that, well, the EU charges us 39% tariffs. And it's like, how's the EU supposed to negotiate based on that if it's not true? You can't. How are you supposed to offer lowering your tariffs on us if the tariffs are already low in reality? How can you even... That seems like it'd be incredibly infuriating to try to do that, like come to some kind of deal.
reciprocity, Trump might do the same. Unfortunately, Trump wasn't convinced, and in a White House press round, he said it wasn't good enough because, quote, the EU was formed to really do damage to the United States in trade.
What? What? Do we not benefit directly from doing trade with the EU? The whole premise for... I've seen a lot of this online, where it's like people trying to make analogies for Trump's logic. Like, if you go down to the grocery store and buy a bottle of milk, and then it's basically if you went to the grocery store and you bought a bottle of milk and you started saying, this grocery store never bought a bottle of milk from me. What did the grocery store ever buy from me? The grocery store is taking advantage of me. And it's like, no, you just get to go to the grocery store and buy the products you need, and you get a benefit. You get the items you want, and the grocery store gets your money. And I don't know who in their right mind would somehow find a way to twist that into a complaint or something.
So, in this video, we're going to take a look at how Trump's tariffs will affect the European economy and how the EU will respond, given a zero-tariff trade deal doesn't seem on the cards.
Again, this is TLDR News. Really great YouTube channel that really helps me understand a lot about what Europe is doing and thinking and the policy decisions. So this is a great channel. How will Europe respond to Trump's tariffs? I'm dying to know, actually.
We're getting remarkably close to 1 million subscribers.
Oh, yes. And certainly subscribe to them if you like their news channel.
A hand and subscribe today. So let's start by looking at how the tariffs will affect the EU. Now, admittedly, a lot is still unclear, and fully understanding or quantifying the impact of this tariff tsunami is difficult at the moment.
It is.
With that being said, there's a pretty clear consensus that this will do some short-term harm to the wider European economy.
Sure.
In general, Europe exports a lot of stuff to the US.
Right.
And Trump's 20% tariff will mean less demand for these goods.
I'm just shaking my head because it's like... It's what I was just saying before. Somehow, Trump and our government have decided buying goods from other countries is somehow taking advantage of us. We decide what we buy. That's no one's making us do it, and it's benefiting us. It's not like you're just taking our money and running. We get products and services in exchange for the money. I truly don't understand like how this even became a point of contention. Like the EU is taking advantage of us. Like what are you talking about? We're just trading.
which makes up around 2% of the EU's GDP. And in the short term, the EU's GDP will likely contract by 0.3%, according to the ING. No other country can really replace the US in this respect. Americans consume more stuff than basically anyone else, and the uncertainty created by Trump's trade wars will probably dampen consumer demand elsewhere.
You can't replace us. That's one thing about America. You gotta say we consume a lot of stuff. It's probably incredibly annoying that a lot of countries around the world are dependent in some capacity on trading with the United States. We're a very big market, and as consumers, we like to buy stuff. That's for sure. So, in a perfect world, I'm sure the EU and most countries around the world would prefer to maintain some kind of trade relationship with the United States if it's possible. I'm just not sure if it's possible, given that you really have to come to some kind of agreeable terms with Donald Trump, and that seems very difficult right now.
We should also mention that the effect of these tariffs will vary across each member state, depending on its bilateral trade with the US. In general, you should expect European countries that run the biggest trade surplus, like Ireland, Germany, and Italy, to be hit hardest, while countries like France, Spain, and Belgium, with which the US runs surpluses or small deficits, i.e., the US imports more from them than it exports, should be less affected.
Okay.
On the other hand, surplus countries like Germany should count themselves lucky Trump applied a single tax to the entire EU. Because if he'd calculated individual rates for each European country using the same method, they would have been hit with higher rates. Germany, for instance, would have been...
That's right. On the chart, it was just the EU all as one entity rather than the individual countries that comprise it.
been hit with a 26% tariff, while Ireland would have been hit with an eye-watering 42% tariff. There were also a handful of products which have been temporarily exempted from Trump's tariffs, like pharmaceuticals, meaning countries like Ireland, which exports 58 billion euros worth of pharmaceuticals and chemicals to the US every year, will actually have an effective tariff rate far below 20%.
This is also interesting stuff. Like, I never knew about Ireland, like, shipping drugs, the good kind of drugs, pharmaceutical medicine to the United States. I didn't even know about this stuff. I'm learning a lot about the trade relationships between America and a lot of different countries that I really never thought about before.
Assuming these exemptions are sustained. Vice versa, Trump introduced a handful of additional tariffs earlier in the year on European steel, aluminium, and automotives,
Right.
which means manufacturing heavy economies like Slovakia will face extra tariffs at an effective rate well above 20%.
Right.
Anyways, putting individual countries aside for now, Trump's trade wars will also exacerbate anxieties about Europe's deindustrialization, given that a large fraction of these exports are industry adjacent, and that Trump's 54% tariff on China risks inviting a flood of Chinese exports, as Chinese businesses that are now effectively unable to sell to the US market redirect their goods into Europe.
Yeah, this is the biggest news as far as tariffs are concerned in the United States right now. No one's really talking about Europe or a lot of the other countries. It's all about China. Because, well, the pause was put into effect, so everything's just kind of on hiatus. And the really big news right now is with the US and China we are literally in a tit for tat, like tariff contest at this point. We raised the tariffs, China then increased their tariffs, then we increased our tariffs, then China increased the tariffs, literally sometimes in the same day or the next day. I think the idea, I want to say that the US tariffs on China are over 100% at this point. I didn't even know that's possible, by the way. What does that mean? Well, like if you buy a import Chinese goods, you have to pay more than they're worth in tariffs? I don't even know what a greater than 100% tariff rate means. I didn't know that was possible. So yeah, the really big news here right now in America is people trying to figure out what's happening with China, because they're a very important trading partner. The relationship between America and China has been, like kind of strange, and but we've always at least maintained this trade, and there's so much Chinese goods that gets imported to America. Amazon is like I feel like it's like at least 50% Chinese goods. And this is affecting a lot of American businesses. And the trade war between China and America has gotten out of control in the last few days. So I can't even overstate how crazy that has gotten.
Pushing prices down further, putting more strain on their European competitors.
Yes, so kind of lost my train of thought there, but basically that means China is just going to do business with other countries around the world, European countries. China will make up this deficit, not trading with the US, by trading more with other places. And that could be a big benefit to the EU, or from what I understand, this is all going to be painful for the EU in the short term. But it could be actually kind of good for the EU in the long term. And I actually did a video about that a few days ago.
The silver lining here is that a flood of cheap Chinese goods could bring down prices for European consumers and offset some of the inflation that might be incurred by tariff-related disruptions to supply chains.
Right.
This puts the EU in somewhat of a stronger position than the US, where inflation is being compounded by tariffs-related disruption, a weak dollar, and more expensive imports.
Yeah.
This is why, after a meeting in Luxembourg earlier this week, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said that Europe is always ready for a good deal.
I mean, from several of the things I'm hearing in this video, Europe actually sounds like you're doing, for giving you a lot of credit here, you're doing your part in saying, yeah, I mean, we could make a deal. Like, it's really just up to Donald Trump to come to the table and be like, okay, and to be reasonable. But if you know anything about the Donald Trump style of deal making, the whole strategy that he has is to be unreasonable at first, then come to the negotiations from this outrageous position and try to negotiate some kind of great deal because he's set the expectations so high for what he wants. But it doesn't work if the other country doesn't want to come to the table and make a deal. So America should count itself very, very, very fortunate that Europe actually wants to make any kind of deal with us. We should jump on that immediately. That would be great if this could all actually come to some kind of amicable conclusion. That'd be great.
And, to stave off a trade war, offered Trump a 0-for-0 tariff deal for industrial goods.
0 for 0. 0 tariffs? Just free trade. Sounds great. Sounds wonderful. Let's do it. Great. Get on the phone. Yeah. I actually didn't know that the EU was pushing this. And it kind of makes me annoyed that the United States hasn't made some kind of deal around this.
However, negotiating with Washington looks pretty futile. Earlier this week, Trump stated he's not interested in any talks unless the EU pays the US a lot of money on a yearly basis. And then, on Monday afternoon, he said a zero-for-zero deal was off the table.
What? See, there's so much news coming out, like I didn't even know about this. What? Why? Like, that's just fair. That's literally... It's because, I guess, Trump and our government has it in our minds that we have been very wronged, and we need yearly payments? And a zero for zero isn't good enough. Well then, how is a deal going to be made? Like, I can't imagine a world where Europe makes a better deal than this.
Instead, it looks likely the EU will have to agree on a set of targeted retaliatory measures. Broadly speaking, the EU can decide to either impose tariffs on services or on goods. And the way we see it, it will probably be best if the EU's retaliatory measures were focused on services rather than goods. This is because tariffs on token goods like Levi jeans or Harley-Davidson motorbikes, which is what the EU has gone for in the past, are only so effective. The Commission is currently considering tariffs of up to 25% on a broad range of US goods, including soybeans, almonds, and plastic goods. But this isn't going to stress the White House out too much. Things have been made much more difficult for the Commission here because individual member states have been lobbying for exemptions. France, for instance, has...
Yeah, this is starting to get kind of complicated. I'm hanging in there. I'm still, stuck on the fact that the EU, tried to negotiate some kind of, reasonable end to all this, and the United States said no. It hasn't been quite presented like that to me. That's alarming and frustrating. Anyway, so this is talking about how this is kind of complicated for how the EU wants to retaliate against the United States because the EU is made of a lot of different countries that might want to do different things.
Has resisted measures against bourbon whiskey, whilst Ireland has asked for dairy duties to be dropped. Focusing on services might thus be more effective, not least because while the US runs a trade deficit in goods with the EU, it actually runs a trade surplus when it comes to services, which means the EU has more leverage in a services-based trade war. The EU would thus probably be better off cracking down on American tech companies, which is something Trump clearly doesn't like, or excluding American firms, including consultancies, banks, and law firms, from government contracts. This could be done.
Yeah, it's just sad that this is the point we're at, where the news is just, what could the United States do to piss off Europe the most? Okay, what could Europe do to hurt the United States the most? That's where we're at. That's where we're at. And that's very sad.
Done via the EU's new and as of yet unused anti-coercion instrument, dubbed the Trade Bazooka, which provides legal grounds for the EU to respond asymmetrically to economic coercion. But whilst the Trade Bazooka weapon sounds pretty effective, it requires the support of a qualified majority in the EU Council, meaning 55% of EU countries representing at least 65% of the total EU population. Whilst both France and Germany have expressed support for using the ACI, other countries worry this could just escalate the trade war and ultimately do more damage to their economies.
At this point, it's like, the United States is clearly not afraid to do whatever we're gonna do. The Trump administration, our government currently, is just gonna do whatever the hell it wants to do to other countries. So I don't know why other countries would hesitate to do whatever's best for them.
Reported earlier this week that when the EU trade chief, Maroš Šefčovič, did a straw poll, only a handful of EU ministers were in favour of the idea, with states like Ireland and Italy, whose pharmaceutical and wine sectors are very much at risk, resisting most vocally.
I see.
Ultimately, this looks to be yet another test of the EU's cohesion, and Europeans should hope the bloc can come to a consensus on its response, or risk being bullied into a bad deal by Trump.
Exactly.
This story, like...
All right. I think that's the end. Yeah, that's the end. Wow. As always, it's great to hear the European perspective on all this. And there was just a lot of kind of European news that I didn't even know about here. I can't even imagine being in the EU's position. It's very strange for me because as an American, I'm in the United States. Donald Trump is my president, and he's doing all these crazy things. And so I'm in that position where that's my country, and it's tough to, put myself in the mindset of all the other countries around the world. I try to, like, imagine if some other country was trying to bully us into these bad deals and doing all these tariff threats and all this stuff. And I can come up with a couple words for what I think I would be feeling: frustrated, angry, annoyed, like not sure if I even want to associate with that country anymore. So, and based on a lot of comments and stuff I've seen online, I think that's pretty much the sentiment going on. So, who knows what's going to happen now? Right now, it's the 90-day pause. 90 days until the tariffs maybe go into effect against the EU. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe a deal will happen. Maybe not. Who knows? I'm just glad to be a little more educated about what's going on here. So anyway, if you enjoyed this, feel free to give this video a like or leave a comment. Especially if you're a European and you have feelings or opinions about all this stuff. That'd be awesome to hear about. And if you're interested in more videos like this, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching, and see you next time.